identifies with the mind, it gets dragged around by the mind, and the soul thinks I am the mind, or what's happening to my body is happening to me, which is not. It's just like, I'll give you an example. You go to sleep at night. Have you ever saw yourself in the dream? You're dreaming and you're seeing your actual physical self in the dream. Okay, so then the question is, who's seeing and who's that person in the dream? Which one is the real one? The actual person who is seeing is you, the soul, and what you're seeing in the dream is your impressions of yourself based on the mind, which is not you, it's simply your body, that's all. So in that way you can see yourself distinct from your body and from your mind. Because dreaming state is another form of reality, or what we say physical reality on the subtle level. Just like this waking reality you're in now is another form of dream. You're dreaming you're a man, you're a particular race, you're in Chicago, you have all these are all dreams. It has nothing to do with you. You're not here. You're with Krishna in the spiritual world. Your soul is always connected with Krishna. But the mind gets in the way, and we start to identify with all these other things, and therefore that is called Maya, or illusion. So when we cut through these, what we say, illusions created by the mind due to our association with matter, we start to come to our real identity. And when we understand our real identity, then we can start using the mind in the right way. And don't be used by the mind. So who's going to use the mind? Is the soul going to use the mind? Yes and no. Because the soul will act through another feature of the mind, which is a higher form of the mind called the intelligence. So Srila Rupa Goswami explains that the connection between the soul and the connection with the soul is through the intelligence. When the intelligence is guided by scripture, when the intelligence is guided by guru, then that guidance, which is philosophical and transcendental knowledge, brings the mind in connection with Krishna through the process of using the intelligence in connection with transcendental knowledge. That's why. So transcendental knowledge is the gateway or the pathway to self-realization using the intelligence. So most of the time we're dragged around by the mind because the mind just it does what it wants to do. It doesn't listen to anybody, and it'll do anything it wants to do. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati says, your mind is a non-devotee, Haribol. So we're not supposed to associate with non-devotees. So what does that mean? You have to make your mind a devotee, like that. So, for example, I'll give you some more ideas about the mind. All right, think of nothing. Can you do it? No, it's not possible. As soon as I say think of nothing, you start thinking about something that is nothing, which is, it's just the opposite of what we're trying to, say. So the mind is, it's more or less an impressionable part of our existence that has been with us since the time the soul has come to the material existence. It's not like you have a new mind every life. That mind goes through the same, you're using the same mind life after life after life. But what is in the mind, at least on the, what we say, conscious awareness, is only at least 10% of all the thoughts, impressions, desires, experiences that we've had for millions of births. That's why a lot of times people have experiences that in their mind they can't identify with. Because sometimes, and it happens a lot in dreams, but it also can happen on the waking level, that the mind will bring up impressions from previous lives that one cannot have any, what we say, connection with in this life. There was a good philosopher, very good. He was actually a psychologist. And Srila Prabhupada liked him. He thought he was pretty good. His name was Carl Jung, a German philosopher. And he said there is the consciousness and the collective unconsciousness. In the collective unconsciousness is all the impressions from previous lives. So we're living with this mind that has been with us life after life after life. So sometimes we wonder, why is it so hard to practice Krishna consciousness? Krishna consciousness is really easy. It's so easy, Prabhupada said, you'll miss it. But it's because of the mind that it makes it hard. And all the impressions and experiences we've had from other lifetimes, and how much we identify that as reality, or identify that as our identity. So we're working with something very vast. Another example would be if you have a computer. So your computer, the computer is like the brain. And what's on the screen is the impression of the mind. But what's on the screen, is that everything within the computer? No. The large majority is where? In the hard drive with software. So what we see on the screen at a particular time, or what's the impression of our mind right now, is such an insignificant part of the collective unconsciousness within the mind. The reason why I'm bringing all this up is just to show you this power of this mind. Because once you learn how your mind works and what is the nature of your mind, then there's no more problems in life. Then you have the tools to solve the problems. Otherwise, the mind will create more problems for you and drag you this way and that way. And sometimes we see people go crazy. They don't want to go crazy, but the mind has that tendency to confuse and conflict so many thoughts, impressions, ideas. It's like one day you like something and the next day you dislike the same thing you liked the day before. Which one is real? None of them. These are all impressions that we have in this world. So cutting through all these things and ultimately coming to clear consciousness means to direct that mind to Krishna. And how do you do that? One of the ways is to watch your mind. Don't let your mind take you. Learn how to watch your mind. A way of watching the mind is just see how you are acting and interacting in different ways. Watch yourself. We usually like to watch everybody else, right? Or we have a good way of we have our way of experience in the world, and we take in so many impressions, desires, and experiences. But then again, when we start to watch our mind, we also see how it works and how it doesn't work. And the impressions that we get when the mind is focused outside is how we interpret those impressions from the external environment is really based on what is on your internal consciousness. Just like one person might say, well, this tastes really nice. Another person say, how can you like that? Or one person will say, well, she's really beautiful. Are you kidding? Come on, you're sleeping. Well, this guy, he's really a nice person. You don't really know him. Nobody's mind agrees with anybody else's. Is that okay? I'm just showing you how the material energy works, so you don't become caught up in all these big clouds of illusionary movements of this world, and we can keep ourselves moving in the direction that we need to move into. A lot of these things that we experience are just useless. Most of it is mostly just useless. And yeah, I had one other thing. Oh, I forgot that. Okay, there goes the mind. Yeah, it's the impressions of the mind. So the mind is like a mirror. We also chant that verse, Chaito, Darpanam, Marjanam. Chaita means mind, Darpanam means mirror, and Marjanam means to cleanse. So cleansing the mirror of the mind means to purify the mind through the sound vibration of Krishna's holy name or the activities and pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, either one. These are some ways we can do that. How to control the mind, I'm going to speak about that tomorrow in detail because it's a very, very complex part of our impressions. And there's a beautiful verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam in the 5th canto, which Srila Prabhupada gives an interesting um, purport about controlling the mind. But right now I'm just trying to give you a little idea what is this mind and how it works and how it goes this way and that way. You'll see how mind puts everything together. Just like if you watch a movie, you're watching the movie and it seems like something is happening. But if you break up the movie and you actually see there's individual slides that connect one slide with the other until once those slides are moving fast, it looks like something is happening. But when you look at each slide separately, you'll see that each slide is simply an image of itself. So the mind does the same thing with reality. It puts together all these impressions and comes up with a particular scenario. But if you break it down to individual little experiences, you'll find that there's no connection between them. Does that make sense? Okay. Mind functions through dreams, through transmigrations, and through trance. In order for you to control your mind, you have to do one thing. And that might be a little hard, especially in Western society. You have to slow it down. We have to slow it down because even from what we say, the physical point of view, or might we say the, scientific point of view, that there are different levels of brain waves, and the slowest brain waves is delta waves. Delta waves are conducive to sleep and to meditation. So meditation is the principle of spiritual practice. Meditating on Krishna, meditating on the activities of devotional service, meditating on Krishna's name, form, qualities, pastimes. In other words, becoming absorbed in that. When the mind goes too fast, it skims through all these things, and it appears that these same images that we experience that are actually spiritual are simply a series of experiences we're experiencing within the external environment. But actually, everything spiritual is transcendental. Everything in the external environment that is moving around is under the guise of one of the three modes of material nature, either goodness, passion, or ignorance. So, but how do you, I'm trying not to get into the mind control because I want to open up that door tomorrow. Any questions so far about the mind and how it moves and how it works and how it somehow or other controls us and how to somehow or other keep yourself watching your own mind? Yes. Microphone.
Maharaj, I was very fascinated by by the picture that you put, which actually makes so much sense when the transmigration of the
So,
body, of the soul to different body, but actually the mind goes with it. So actually we've been traveling with the mind throughout
the mind
all
takes it. The mind is the one that transports the soul to the next body.
and remains.
Yeah, and remains.
So we've been in our minds, there are traces of all our birth in this material world.
Yeah, same mind. Except you lose the memories of your previous birth, and those things now become part of the unconscious part of the mind. And the experiences you're having now are more like the waking consciousness.
Sometimes we have the depiction of the subtle body as this that is a body that is almost like a ghost type of body that it is have the same image of the body that you have.
Right.
So
You can tell a person's mind by the body they have. The body, you actually formulate your body by your mind. You're actually transforming your body even physically now as you transform your mind. If you become more degraded, it comes out on the physical level also, not only on the mental level. And if you become more elevated, it also works in the same way. So you can pretty much see where a person's body, consciousness is by the type of body they have, pretty much.
thank you.
When you know how the mind works like that. And most people are within passion and ignorance. Devotees are in either goodness or in transcendence, either one, or somewhere in between.
Yeah, earlier you were talking about how consciousness and the mind is separate things
Completely.
completely, and I just wanted like you to elaborate more of what consciousness is and what the mind is, and
Yeah.
what both what are both functions. What is what do we need consciousness for,
Consciousness
and
means
what do we need the mind for?
yeah, the
Thank you.
impressions upon the consciousness is the mind. The impressions upon the consciousness is the mind. The consciousness is the awareness. The consciousness is like the sky. The objects you see in the sky are like the impressions of the mind on the consciousness. So the consciousness works through the mind, and so what impressions you have upon your consciousness are just the movements of the mind, that's all. But the consciousness is never touched, just like the sky is never touched by the objects that is within the sky. So your consciousness always remains pure, but because you identify with your mind, you have what is called contaminated consciousness. That makes sense? Yes.
The Bhagavad Gita verse, we have that Abhyasa and
Vyasa kiya
Vairagya.
budhir ekeha kuranandana.
No, Maharaj. After Krishna says that I can control the wind but not the mind.
Yeah, abhyasena tu kunteya
Yeah, Maharaj.
vairagya.
Yeah, that Abhyasa and Vairagya, both seems to be like, maybe I'm not understanding it right, but I tried.
What
but
is vairagya? Is that the question? What
like
is the nature of that vairagya?
the Abhyasa and Vairagya, looks like I don't understand it completely. Like I just
Krishna,
exercise and practicing didn't work actually.
well, Krishna explains it. Then it's translated into two aspects. One, to give up those things that are contrary to our spiritual practice, and two, to practice devotional service. In other words, accept things that are favorable for our elevation in Krishna consciousness and reject those things that are unfavorable. And the question is, you have to know what is the difference between both. But Krishna is just giving you the formula, that's all. So Arjuna is saying, Krishna, you're asking me to control the mind. I think it's like controlling the wind. And Krishna agrees. It's not easy to control the mind. But he said, if you practice, but even if you practice and don't relinquish or don't, what we say, give up those things that are contrary to spiritual practice, your practice will have very little effect. So that's sometimes we see that a devotee is very trying hard, but still they hang on to the material concept of life, and therefore their ability to move forward in Krishna consciousness is so slow. Because we're still hanging on to, those things that are, what we say, unnecessary for our spiritual development. I mean, there's certain material things we need in order to keep the body and soul functioning nicely. But a lot of the stuff that we have incurred or accrued over many lives are simply things that have nothing to do with our success in spiritual life. Impressions, desires, attitudes, so many things. These are all subtle aspects of the mind. So Krishna is saying, practice, but also give up the unhealthy things. That's basically what he's saying. Sunil, you had a question? Okay.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So you touched upon realization a little bit, and I'm just trying to understand. So when we realize things, it just helps to control the mind. It seems like. So is that realization on the mental plane, or is that even beyond?
Something spiritual?
Yeah.
It's above the mind. It's on the level of transcendence. So on the level of transcendence, it is actually the nature of spirit. So although it's coming through the mind, it is the experience of the pure mind. Over the pure mind is the covered mind. When we cut through the covered mind with transcendental thoughts, then we enter into the pure consciousness. To stay there means to continue with that type of consciousness. The thing is, we jump back and forth between the material and spiritual. Does that help? Is there someone else? Baladev?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for your class. You were mentioning accepting things that are favorable and rejecting things that are unfavorable, the nature of the mind. My question is that you were mentioning the point of the greatest non-devotee is the mind. The greatest non-devotee is the mind.
Yeah, the conditioned mind.
And so it may be easy for us from our perspectives to reject unfavorable association, but like you were mentioning, we can't reject the mind. So what does it mean to...
Make the mind your friend. Krishna says, the mind is the best of friend or the worst enemy. He says in the Bhagavad Gita, elevate yourself by the mind, don't degrade of yourself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. So, therefore, when Prahlad Maharaj was spoken to by his father, Hiranyakashipu, Hiranyakashipu said, you're siding with my enemy. Means Vishnu. He was glorifying Vishnu. And Prahlad said, my dear father, the only enemy is your own mind. Friends and enemies are made by the mind. That's all. Impressions, desires, thoughts. What is real and what is not real? Everything in this world is subject to change. Therefore, from the spiritual perspective, nothing in this world is real. It's all transitory. But it has meaning if you learn how to use it to reach the real. The temporary, when it's used in the service of the eternal, becomes also as good as the eternal. But otherwise, it's useless. Like that. So everything material is considered to be, in one sense, it's real, but in another sense, it's temporary. But Shastras also define temporary as being unreal. What is that verse from the Bhagavad Gita? 2:16. What is 2:16? Who knows that verse? I'm trying to think. 2:16. The seers of the truth have concluded of the non-eternal there is no nor duration, and of the eternal there is no cessation. This seers have concluded by studying the nature of both. Nasate tavidhe bhavo nabhavo vidyate sataha ubhaya apidristontas tvanayas tattva darshabhihi. Darshabhihi, one who sees. One who sees the temporary and the eternal side by side can see that the temporary is non-existent, the eternal is always existent, like that. We have to deal with the temporary, but we should not identify the temporary as real, that's all. Something is always changing. Prabhupada tells that story of truth and beauty. You know that story, right? How many have heard that story, Truth and Beauty? Yeah. Some people don't like that story. So it's a little hesitate to tell that. Should I tell it? Even the persons that don't like it, they said yes. All right. There is this one very saintly, beautiful lady. She's living in a cottage somewhere out in one kingdom. The prince of the kingdom, he's riding through the kingdom. He's trying to see what is there in this kingdom. He just sees this cottage. He becomes fascinated, knocks on the door. This very saintly and very attractive girl opens the door. He's immediately attracted by her beauty. So much so, that's all he can think of. Being a prince and having power and influence, he uses it and makes proposals for marriage. She's not interested. But he is somewhat persistent. And being respectful to him and not wanting to, what we say, become too offensive to him, she says, all right, I agree to your proposal, but you must come back after 1 week. So he leaves, he gets on his horse and he's counting the minutes, 168 hours in a week. And he's counting the minutes. In the meantime, she's preparing for her next meeting with him. And she takes these purgatives and laxatives, and then she just starts collecting all the substances from her body into these buckets. And she keeps the buckets in the back room of her house. Now the prince comes back. He knocks on the door. He's all excited. She opens the door, and he looks. And he says, "My dear old lady, where's that young lady who was here?" She said, "That is me." He said, "No." "Yes, it's me. You don't recognize me?" "No, you're not the same. You were interested in my beauty. Come on, I'll show you where it is." So she takes him into the back room and she says, "Here, this is what you're attracted of." And she shows him all the buckets of nice substances. So Prabhupada tells that story, just says that truth is actually beautiful and truth is eternal. But what goes on in the material world as truth or as beauty is always subject to time or change. So bringing the mind to a position where it can become our best friend means to use the mind in Krishna consciousness, basically. That's the whole process. And that takes a lot of work. But once you reach a certain level of practice, it becomes natural. It becomes natural. So when you practice that for a while, and you have to practice detachment. How you work? You do everything you do in this world, but in a detached way. You don't become eager for the results. Now, how do you work without trying to get results? That's hard. Well, when you realize you can't make the results happen, you can simply try. And when you make an effort, and if you simply accept whatever happens as the results of your effort, then that is called detachment. Material detachment. You do your best, and happiness and distress, or success and failure, Krishna says, are all the same when the mind is fully controlled. He says when the mind is fully controlled, the supersoul is already reached. What is it? Happiness and distress, honor and dishonor, heat and cold, they're all the same. The dualities of the material energy merge into an absolute principle of oneness, and one is not affected by either. One may have to deal with them, but that dealing doesn't divert one's mind away from one's goal in life. That's the point. Keep the mind focused on Krishna, our devotional service. Anything else? Tomorrow we'll do yes, another question?
You may answer this tomorrow. I think it's maybe in the realm of what you're going to deal with tomorrow, but I'll just...
What time does the class end? There's no limit? Okay, this is completely transcendental atmosphere. No limitations. Right. Okay, as long as you can keep your mind, I'll keep mine. I'll try. Yes, go ahead.
That famous kirtan, Niya Vishvambara Sheet. He says something very profound that I never forgot. He says, if we don't preach to the mind, then the mind will preach to us.
Yeah, it's always doing that.
So I think this is my kind of going towards what you're maybe going to deal with tomorrow, probably. So.
Yeah, that's tomorrow. Tomorrow's verse will be from the 5th canto, chapter number 11, verse number 17, from the Bhagavatam 5:11-17. So you can maybe look at the verse ahead of time. Okay. Anything else about the mind? Yeah. Shamasaki?
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay.
Maharaj, you mentioned that Krishna says that soul is immovable. You said that Krishna mentioned in Bhagavad Gita that soul is immovable.
So immovable. He's fixed up, yeah.
So what does it literally mean that soul is not movable, because it moves from one body to another?
It stays fixed in that body until the time it's destined to go on to its next body. You can't move that soul out of that body until until its designated time within that body has reached.
Okay.
Just like people they do heart transplants, and they think they're moving, they're bringing one heart into the body, but the soul remains the same. You can take one heart out and you put another heart in, but the heart will not move. The soul will not move. It'll stay in that body.
Okay, I was just thinking that because you mentioned that in the context of the discussion about the mind, is it that the soul does not move according to the dictations of the mind? That is why it is called fixed.
I'm sorry, I missed a few questions.
Because you mentioned about this soul is immovable in the context of the today's discussion about the mind. I thought it meant that because
ahead.
because the soul is fixed because it does not move according to the dictations of the mind.
Yeah, but it appears to. When the soul, you identify with the mind, then you think I'm your mind, and the impressions that happen are all part of me. It's just a movement of the mind, but when we identify with the mind, therefore, learning to watch your mind and directing your mind by higher intelligence is the way to control the mind. That's one way. I'll give you another example of how the mind works. Prabhupada tells this story. There's a man in the kitchen. There's a man, he's in the living room, and he's an old man, and he's hard of hearing. So he calls to his wife, "My dear wife, when will supper be ready?" She calls back and says, "Shut up. Read the newspaper. Don't bother me." And then, after some time, he calls again. And she responds again. So after the second time, he says, "What's wrong with my wife? She must be deaf. I'm calling and she's not answering." He's deaf. And she's thinking she's deaf. That's how the mind works. Atmanam manyate jagat. What you experience inside, you put outside. Huh? Question, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, in some movies, I don't know how to ask this. In some movies, I can see the soul is moving from one body to another body. I mean, they will sleep somewhere. I mean, the soul will move to other body. So, how that will move? I don't know. I mean, how it is moving.
How's the soul move from one body to another?
Yeah, I mean, I saw some movies. I don't know. I mean, how
It's
to ask this question? I'm sorry
it's
for that.
its transmigration of the soul is fortified or facilitated by the mind. The mind is carrying the soul from one body to another. The mind is your subtle body. You see, at the time of death, whatever material desires you still have remain in the mind. So the mind is going to carry you, the soul, and the sense of intelligence and the false ego to a next physical body according to the nature of those desires. So one is born in a particular family with a particular set of what we say, a particular nature. Your personality is still there at the time of birth, it's just not developed, that's all. And that's all due to the movements of the mind. The mind is moving the soul from one place to another. Yeah, so just don't listen to your mind, that's all. Listen to Krishna. If you listen to Krishna, then you have something positive in everything you do. So therefore, we fill the mind with the instructions of the spiritual master and the words of Krishna. And that becomes our only focus. Then we move on we're moving in a spiritual way, although we're still in this material world. We're connecting our mind with the soul. And what is happening? You're dissolving your material mind and you're exposing your spiritual mind, because the soul also has a mind. But it's pure and spiritual. But it's covered. It's like a glove covers a hand. Although the glove looks like the hand, it's not. And without the hand, the glove is useless. So our material mind is it's just a covering over our spiritual mind, that's all. the spiritual mind is pure. It's full of knowledge and full of love for Krishna. It's natural. I mean, there's many more things we could say, but I think I covered what I wanted to cover tonight. Any more questions? Yes. Gokulananda, right?
Maharaj, at the beginning of the class, you mentioned that there are three functions of the mind, and one of them is feeling. And so there is a common understanding that people say that we usually forget what people do or say, but we can't forget how people make us feel.
Right.
And so
That's a good one.
yeah, for the mind is when we are controlling the mind, sometimes a thought is easy to put away, but not feelings. And we see also in Krishna's pastimes and the higher, the secondary rasas are all related to feelings.
Yeah.
And so it seems that feelings or emotions are very important in devotional service, because if we don't have those emotions while we practice service
Right.
and fix the mind, it's very difficult to keep the mind steady.
The idea is to direct positive emotions towards Krishna. Because devotional service is all about emotions, loving emotions, or those emotions that are conducive to our relationship with Krishna. And then the soul is full of emotion. Yeah. Yeah. The rational mind is just a way to move in a certain direction. It's about emotion. Krishna, Prema Pumartha Mahan is the goal, to love Krishna. Love is the highest and fullest and most, satisfying of all the emotions. When there's love, there's everything. There's knowledge, there's happiness, there's everything comes when love is there. So yeah, you're right. So Krishna's pastimes is about connecting our loving emotions to Krishna through these different pastimes. And that loving emotion is expressed in different ways. It's expressed through service, but the impressions, not the impressions, the results we get from that contact may be different. In other words, a lot of Krishna's pastimes are funny, and you laugh. And when you're laughing in terms of Krishna's pastimes, that's an expression of emotion connected with Krishna on the spiritual platform. That laughter is spiritual. Or sometimes people argue with Krishna, just like Mother Yasoda gets angry with Krishna. But that anger is loving anger, and therefore it's transcendental. Although it appears to be anger, or the mother's unhappiness why the child's not obeying. We're in the middle of Damodar. This is really fundamental to the whole Damodar Leela. Mother Yasoda is getting frustrated, but her love is never checked by that frustration. It's enhanced by the frustration, actually. Okay, does that help a little? Yeah. Shamagopi. Okay.
Maharaj, so is Krishna consciousness a process for purifying the mind, or is it the process for purifying false ego? Because if I identify myself as I am this, is particularly an aspect of false ego. So I, until I identify myself as servant of Krishna, which comes from a purified ego, then
When
how
you
would
purify the mind, you're going to ultimately come back to your actual identity. When you come to your identity, then the ego is purified. What is that identity? Jiver Surupai Krishna Nityadas. That your only identity is that you're an eternal servant of Krishna. You have no other identity. Any other identity is part of the false ego, which is supported by the mind. That's all. That makes sense? Yeah. The false ego is even subtler than the mind, but it uses the mind in order to facilitate its desire to enjoy in this material world. I'll give you an example of false ego. Even in Krishna consciousness, you do something for somebody and they benefit, and you take credit for that benefit. That's how the false ego works.
Thank you, Maharaj. Neuroscientists have discovered lately that the part of the brain where the emotions come is the most primitive of the whole brain.
Primitive?
The most primitive. That is why we snap just with one word. We react.
You mean
There's
like,
no process.
You mean
in our.
primordial? Is that the word primordial?
I beg your pardon?
The word primordial or primitive?
Primitive. Primitive. It is the most elemental part of the brain, is where the emotions come. There's no process. It's not as sophisticated as the other parts of the brain that can make other.
Okay.
So my question is, what should we do? To control the brain or to control the mind?
No, the brain is like the computer, and the mind is what's up on the screen. The brain is only a machine, that's all it is. It's a machine, nothing more. You can live without a brain, but you can't live without a mind. I could make a joke out of that, but I'm afraid to. Because there's a lot of people who are brainless, and somehow they still go on. You know? But to use an example is that there was one young boy. This is scientifically recorded. He was born with no brain cavity, but lived for about 3 weeks. And ultimately, you need the brain to function for the body. So all the organs of the body are parts of the bigger machine, which is called the human body. So the brain is one of the more important parts of the body, by which the mind is working in and out of. That's all. Mind goes, the external mind, the internal mind, and the intermediate mind. So it's all part of the brain functions. Just like you sit in front of your computer and you push the button, and then all of a sudden the data comes up on the screen. So the data is coming through the computer. But you're the operator, you're the soul. The soul is the operator. The brain is like the computer, and what's on the screen is the impressions of the mind. So how it comes through the computer is just what the scientists are experimenting with the mechanical part of life. They have no understanding of the spiritual part, therefore they can't understand the nature of the mind. That's why they're always speculating what the mind is. And speculation is not truth. Speculation is speculation. Yeah. Okay. Did we... Yes, another question over there.
Hare Krishna, Guruji. Is mind a part of nature or is a part of soul?
Mind part of,
Nature or is a part of soul?
what's the first word? Nature? It's, mind is the impressions, desires, experiences, idiosyncrasies, likes, dislikes that you have somehow or other experienced and chosen for many, many lifetimes. You might say it's part of human nature. Yeah. Yeah. It's material, but it's subtle. Just like you're using your mind and I'm using my mind. You can't see my mind, I can't see your mind, but we can understand that the mind is there by the interaction. The workings show the example of the presence of mind. You can see the physical body, but you can't see the mind. You can only see the workings of the mind. And that's material nature, yeah. It's not part of the soul. The soul has a spiritual mind, but that's pure, and that doesn't come in contact with matter. The spiritual mind is always with Krishna. Just like now, you're with Krishna, but you don't know it. Each and every one of us are with Krishna right now. But we're just covered by this material body, and we're just not aware of our relationship with Krishna. Prabhupada, as soon as you cut through all this material thing, you realize you never left Krishna. It's all a dream. It's all a big dream created by the mind. You never left Krishna. You can't. You're his part and parcel. You're always with him. He knows. He's always with you. He can see that, but you can't see it. You can't realize that until you actually come back to the pure mind. That's good news. Okay, so maybe we should. What is the actual time? Oh, 8:17. Okay, the deities are resting, ready resting. Okay, so we'll stop now. Do you have prasadam now? Everyone had prasad. Okay, hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll speak a little bit about how to deal with this rascal mind. Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai. Thank you, man. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you all for coming and joining us for today evening's program. Next session is at 7:30 in the morning in the temple room. And